Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and finance. This week, the environment and sustainability. We'll look at illegal mining in Peru, the economic, human and environmental cost.
I'm Mariana Sanchez at the heart of the illegal gold mining business in Peru. This is just one of hundreds of places where miners are digging through the jungle, looking for gold and leaving behind devastation.
And then the right kind of growth. Asia's pulling millions out of poverty, but it's about striking a balance between prosperity and rising emissions. Plus the Danish biotech, which reckons going green can be profitable. From the United States to Mozambique, we will see just how. So here's the idea this week. We want to show you what's being done to the planet and then what's being done to fix that. It's the buzzword of sustainability, doing things in a way that preserves what we have whilst moving towards greener alternatives. And we've got all sorts of examples for you this week of both the good and the bad. Like the illegal gold miners of Peru, who are destroying thousands of hectares of the Amazon jungle. Environmentalists call the damage catastrophic, but they're doing it because, in short, they have to. They're part of what's known as artisanal mining, small-scale mining, which globally engages at least 15 million people across 50 countries. In just the gold market, that amounts to 90% of the labour force, producing 10% of global gold supply. So when you think about mining, these so-called artisans are actually a big part of the picture. So we'll start this week with them, their trade, their survival and their impact on the land. Mariana Sanchez tells their story from the rainforests of Madre de Dios in Peru.
The Amazon, at the heart of one of the most complex and biodiverse areas in the world, there is danger and destruction. This is a modern gold rush. More than 30,000 wildcat miners in a region called Madre de Dios are liquefying the soil, sucking gold-filled muddy waters. This is the Sarayaku gold mine in southwestern Peru, an example of what mining is doing to the rainforest. Lucio Espinosa came from Peru's highlands, lured by promises of riches. He and his group will find around $50 worth of gold in a single day.
We will extract around 25 grams. We will keep only 25% of the gold, and we will divide that among our team.
But for the environment, Lucio's find comes at a cost. Hydrocarbons, oils, and the mercury used to process the gold are poisoning the rainforest. It's being called an environmental disaster.
Among the effects, the alteration of landscape, loss of the unique ecosystems, loss of some species, alteration and destruction of rivers, and contamination.
And it's getting worse. Gold is Peru's first export product. The price of gold in the international market has slightly reduced, but it is still so high that thousands of poor workers continue to flock this area, and they work day and night. The miners work 24-hour shifts, 2 or 3 times a week, and many of them are not even from here. They come from remote places in Peru or even from Bolivia because they believe here they will find gold and a better life. But most don't. The money they make is hardly enough to make ends meet, while the destruction they are causing in many areas is irreversible. Adolfo Suquia is a geologist who owns a gold mine. He says it is possible to work with the environment.
We will minimize the impact rehabilitating the soil while we do mining, reforesting to help nature recover as soon as possible.
The government says nearly 30 tons of mercury are dumped in the mining sites of Madre de Dios every year. Mine owner Isaac Quispe shows us how they are trying to avoid throwing this highly toxic substance on the ground.
We don't burn it or dump it anymore, we bury it. Mercury has become very expensive, so we use 1 kilo per year.
All good intentions, but environmentalists say the disaster is already done. Over 30,000 hectares of the rainforest are degraded or dead.
Apart from mercury and lead, the analysis shows there are oils and fuels leaked in the water. You also find arsenic, cadmium, manganese, and many other metals.
Environmentalists say these toxic substances have contaminated many species of fish, and others are suffocating in the clay-polluted rivers. At the Taricaya Rescue Center, biologists and volunteers are working to protect the many species at risk from hunters, loggers, and now from gold miners.
In
general, all are affected. We're talking even from insects to all the ecological trail. The way mining is operating, it's not leaving anything behind.
Centuries-old trees have been cut and cleared, altering everything from food supplies to nesting sites. The Peruvian government has given these biologists nearly 500 hectares of virgin forest for their research and to provide a home for rescued animals. Miners say they have no other option.
The destruction of the jungle is a bad thing, but what can be done? It's the only job there is here.
Under this piece of land, there is gold. But Edmundo Vázquez says he's resisting the temptation to exploit it.
It's an illness, like cancer.
He's had to fight wildcat miners trying to take over his land. But Edmundo says he will only use it to grow trees and for a fish farm.
Gold is temporary. I want something that will last in the future, for good, for my children and grandchildren.
Stopping illegal gold miners in this Amazon region is tough. The government launched an operation last year to destroy dredgers used to suck the gold-rich soil from riverbanks and to expel miners from natural reserves. But more than 30,000 of them are still working in thousands of hectares of wild terrain. Officials say they're worried because miners are destroying the protected areas.
Miners have entered illegal zones and protected areas that are a World Heritage Site.
The government has divided the gold-rich territory. Miners can only work in designated areas and are banned from protected areas. Police have increased their patrols. Some miners are now complaining their livelihoods are affected.
The army, air forces and police have begun destroying our motors, and now we are jobless.
1/5 of Peru's gold, nearly 30 tons, comes from this region, from both legal and illegal mines. Peru's new laws not only prohibit gold mining in protected areas. Miners working in legal zones must now register, pay taxes, and complete an environmental impact study. Wildcat miners are determined to fight for the concessions they have worked for decades. In March, 3 died while protesting against the new laws. The leader of the miners' movement, Y Madre de Dios, says interdiction is not the answer.
The degradation of the jungle in the last 50 years is 0.3% of the territory. Mining can be done, and the state should do its part by bringing engineers to mitigate the impact by training the people.
The government says it won't back down until illegal mining is stopped, and it has given miners in designated areas a 2-year truce to register.
What was done in one area in over 40 years has been done in others in 4 or 5. That's the irrationality of the savage exploitation of gold. They think, before we're kicked out, let's get as much as we can.
As the market for this precious metal continues booming, the gold bonanza will represent a tough battle for the security forces and a much tougher one for the rainforest.
Okay, so let's take this a step further and look at the economic impact. And we're going to do that with Jaakko Kurushi, a research fellow in energy, environment and resource governance. This is at the Royal Institute of International Affairs at Chatham House. Jaakko, thank you for your time. There's probably no silver bullet for this problem, is there? Because the fact is people are doing this for survival. They will do what they have to do, be it illegal gold mining, be it illegal mining of any sort, just to get some money.
No, that is absolutely right. So if you think about gold mining or artisanal and small-scale mining in general, it's a very difficult, very dangerous activity that oftentimes leaves the miners with less than a few dollars a day. There might be that kind of allure of striking big, but the reality is that for millions of artisanal and small-scale miners, it's a very difficult livelihood. And so you typically will see people or communities engaging in these types of activities if there's really very few other opportunities around to survive and to feed your family.
And then what about the flip side of this, Jaakko? And I know there is, very rarely any sympathy for big corporations. Certainly the best of times there isn't. But this illegal mining, this artisanal mining as you call it, what sort of effect does it have on those businesses, those ones who do have the mining licenses and who do it all, by the book, if I can put it that way?
Well, I think that's a complex question again. I mean, artisanal and small-scale mining is a reality in the mining world. So we're getting about 25% of global gold mining supply from artisanal and small-scale mines, 10 to 15% of diamonds, and a significant amounts of things like tin or tantalum that you will find, for example, in mobile phones. So I don't think artisanal and small-scale mining will go away anytime soon. I think there's a tension, or there's oftentimes tensions between big companies that would like to mine in the same area and artisanal mining communities that typically have been there before, but do not have secure land rights, do not have proper working techniques. And what we see oftentimes that this can lead to some very tense situations between the big mining companies on the one hand and the artisanal miners on the other hand.
Okay, I noticed you listed off a stack of different commodities there. We focused on gold, but there's others, obviously. What sort of effect does price and demand of commodities have? Are we looking at a situation where, and we discussed this earlier, where people are just going to illegally mine regardless because they need any money, or are they driven one way or another by markets and demands?
No, I think there's definitely an impact. We don't really know how many people are engaged in artisanal mining around the world. There's some estimates from early 2000 that put the number at between 20 and 30 million. But commodity prices have gone up massively since. And we know that artisanal miners adjust to that. And if prices go up, people move from one commodity to another or into the artisanal mining sector and then out again into agriculture or other types of activities. So I think the commodity prices have played a huge role in creating incentives for artisanal miners, just like for the mining companies.
Is there any way of quantifying what this is actually costing on a wider scale? I won't quite say on the global economy, but on the mining sector globally. Any sort of estimates on what it's all costing?
Well, I mean, costing whom? That's the question. I mean, the product from artisanal mines is very cheap. Like I said, an artisanal miner, if he makes a few dollars a day, he can be happy. And the commodities that the sector produce, they sell for billions of dollars on the international exchanges. Now, the question then is, where does that money end up? And what you will see is typically that networks of traders, sometimes criminal networks, take a big share out of the proceeds from artisanal mining. I think one of the most problematic aspects is that some of this money ends up in the wrong hands. So I mentioned criminal networks, but we have many cases, especially in Africa, where proceeds from artisanal and small-scale mining end up in the hands of armed groups. The case of blood diamonds in Liberia is something that, and Sierra Leone is something that people are very familiar with. But we have seen that ongoing in the eastern Congo as well, where armed groups are financing their violent campaigns with the proceeds from artisanal mining. And that leads to massive human rights violations, these kind of problems.
All right, that is Jaakko Kuroshi from Chatham House talking illegal mining with us. Thank you, Jaakko.
Thank you.
Now, one thing we didn't deal with so much in that interview, but do want to address now, is the environmental side of things. Obviously, you saw it in Mariana's report. But the fact is, it's not just something like mining which leaves a negative impact on the planet. It's just plain old growth. The more of us there are, quite simply, the more impact there is. Put it this way, in the Asia-Pacific region, there are 2.5 billion mobile phone subscribers, which should give you a pretty good idea of the region's growth in the last decade. But then there is the cost to that same region. Take a look at these numbers. They're from the UNDP, the United Nations Development Programme, which says countries in the Asia-Pacific burn more than 80% of the world's coal directly used by industry. That half of the world's megacities, cities with 10 million people or more, are located in Asia, and it is these types of cities which emit 2/3 of greenhouse gas emissions. and that those emissions contribute to climate change and have an adverse impact on 700 million people in the Asia-Pacific who live in extreme poverty. So it's not a great picture, is it? The cost of growth and expansion to the environment. And we're going to give you actually just a quick snapshot now of 3 different locations across the Asia-Pacific and the challenges presented in each of them. Have a look.
India is growing and it's growing fast. It's estimated that by 2020 there will be 26 million people in New Delhi, making it the 2nd largest city in the world. We're in Chandni Chowk, one of the most crowded areas in the city, and we can see firsthand the problems that rapid urbanization brings with it. Traffic congestion is a big concern here. Every year there's a 10% increase in the number of vehicles. These vehicles also emit greenhouse gases which damage the environment. Because of these concerns, activists have been demanding that the Indian government puts in place an environmentally sustainable policy. They say how this Asian giant manages to balance its drive for greater economic growth along with the needs of its people and the environment will be key for its future.
Bangladesh's capital Dhaka is roughly the size of Brussels, except there's 12 times more people living here. 12 million people have made this city their home, and according to Bangladeshi experts, every day 1,000 people move to the capital. And this is a city that's already densely populated and that has the unsavory title of being one of the world's most polluted city. According to the World Health Organization, the air quality here is 10 times the one set by the UN organization. Now, authorities are scrambling to find a solution. So far, they've resorted to evicting people out of slums. But this is greatly unpopular and it's a short-term measure because according to this UN report, the population of Dhaka is set to double in the next 10 years.
This is Mong Kok in the heart of Hong Kong's Kowloon district, holding the record as the most densely populated place on Earth. Now, Hong Kong as a developed city has grown about as far as it can, but the cities of mainland China are for the most part just getting started. 20 years ago, a quarter of China lived in urban areas. Today, it's 50%, and that pace of urbanization shows no signs of letting up. Now, the electricity for all of these new cities is coming largely from coal-fired power stations. Hong Kong has been moving away from coal as a source of energy for many years now, preferring instead to use natural gas, which produces 50% less greenhouse emissions.
Yeah, nice stuff from our team around the region. Now, those numbers we brought you just before that, they came from the UNDP, as I mentioned, the United Nations Development Programme. They wrote this report called One Planet to Share, which we discussed earlier in the week with Ajay Chibber, the UNDP's Assistant Secretary General.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here with you. Yes, I think what we are trying to say in this report is that Asia is going to grow very fast, and it needs to grow very fast given that there are 900 million still very poor people in Asia Pacific, but that it has to find a way to grow with a much lower emissions intensity than before, because given the size of Asia, given that much of the growth in the world is going to come from Asia, the choices that Asian countries make in the next decade or two will have a huge impact on the planet itself. So I think the report is really trying to say also that this is uncharted territory. Mm-hmm. This is not, there's no sort of blueprint here. This is a new paradigm for development. But given the fact that climate change will also have a big negative impact on the people of Asia, it is important that Asia finds a more sustainable growth path. So the report is not against growth. The report is saying growth is needed, poverty reduction is badly needed, but that a much better path has to be found.
Okay, so you talked about choice there, and I guess we're talking about things like green technology, choosing green technology over things like fossil fuels. Do you think there is some success there, that people are realizing they do have to make that switch?
Well, I think, you know, there is now much greater awareness in Asia that, of course, the climate problem was caused by the industrial countries, but that Asia cannot just say, well, that was a problem caused by them and we are going to grow and in the same old way. I think people are beginning to now realize that new solutions have to be found. And these are new solutions with technology. These are new solutions with finance. These are new solutions that have to be found in the way people are consuming and the way people are recycling. And this is really where the focus of this report is. We know that even with existing technology better used, you could reduce emissions by something like 18 to 26%. But this will be costly, so we need to find finance in order to be able to do this.
And what about the element
if that finance
of,
were to be found?
Forgive me interrupting you, sir, the element of cleaning up after yourself. Whilst we wait for countries and corporations to move to these new technologies, they've got to start cleaning up after themselves to limit the damage that's already occurring now.
Exactly. I mean, that's the big point of this report, that we cannot have growth now and clean up later. That solution will not work, because the rate at which the growth is occurring and the rate at which emissions will take place and the degradation, as it were, of the environment will take place will be not only very costly but almost impossible to clean up later. So a completely new dimension has to be found in the way in which sustainable growth takes place.
And also the way people live, or indeed where they live. I wonder if countries have to think about their population planning. You've got mega cities, lots of these in Asia, 10 million people living in them, but they live on about 2% of the land mass. And then you have 700 million people or so living out in rural areas in extreme poverty. There's this huge split there, and it's contributing, I guess, to a lot more emissions, a lot more pollution in those heavily populated areas.
Yeah, I mean, of course, emissions per capita are still very low in Asia, and as you rightly said, there's a very large number of people. I mean, a quarter of the Asian population does not have even access to electricity. Then there is the need for toilets, for sanitation, for transport systems, etc. And so I think the needs are enormous, and therefore economic growth has to take place. But if that growth was to be done in the same old way, then of course the pressure on resources will become absolutely enormous, which is why China is committed to reducing emissions intensity of its production by 40 to 45%. India has committed to reduce its intensity of emissions intensity of production by 20 to 25%, and would go even higher if more finance was to be available. And Indonesia has committed to similar targets for emissions as well. But we have to also find the financial solutions so far have benefited only a very few countries. So we also have to come up with new financial mechanisms that are more easily accessible to a much wider range of countries than has been the case so far.
So what have we seen this week? We've seen the damage to the environment with the illegal mining in Peru. We heard from the UN there, which is trying to work on change. Now the business that is actually putting its money to work. The company's called Novozymes. It's a huge biotech company which makes enzymes. Now, enzymes are in a whole lot of things we use. Of course, detergents, they help break down dirt on clothing. You would have heard that in the advertising. They're also used in farming and in the production of ethanol as well, an alternative fuel source. And what Novozymes has actually done is go out to Africa, Mozambique specifically, and helped to reduce deforestation. How? Well, our business editor Abid Ali spoke to Novozymes CEO Steen Riskard about this project. He started talking about ethanol and if it really is a green option.
If we start by the most controversial part, that is the corn-based fuel ethanol, which is basically something that only takes place in the United States, where they use 35% of their corn harvest, maize harvest, for just that. The reason that they can do that is that 10 years ago, they transitioned to use a GMO crop. And GMO crop have given them massive yield increases, so that essentially now they have this surplus, 35% of their corn harvest. The next thing is that From that, we are developing what we call the next generation or cellulosic bioethanol. That is an application where instead of using the crop as such, we use the residues from agriculture. Instead of using the corn, we use the corn stems. Instead of using wheat, we use wheat straw and so on. And there is an abundance of leftover agricultural residues or agricultural waste that can be used for that.
Here in the United States, I suppose, it's very helpful that the government says we want to use X amount of ethanol in the production of petrol. In Denmark, for instance, they say by 2050 we want renewable energy to supply all the country's needs. That's the helpful side, and then you get the rather unhelpful side where the European Union will say we want to introduce carbon emission taxes on airlines. Now that's passed on to customers. That's when green technology becomes rather unpopular. How do we get over these kind of issues?
With the new technology, there's always this initial effort where you somehow have to acknowledge that for example, biofuels. Biofuels are up against an existing entrenched technology, that of, you can say, oil and the whole value chain there. That has been established over 100 years. And to kind of start out as a fledgling new technology and compete head-on with something that have been improved and continuously over 100 years is difficult. So in my opinion, it is the role of government to facilitate that transition by giving stimulus for a short period of time, not endlessly, but say 5, maybe 10 years, and then it should be left new technologies should be left to its own devices. If you take corn-based fuel ethanol, that's exactly what happened. 10 years ago, the US government started to implement different regulatory regimes that favored the introduction of biofuels. Now, 10 years later, all of these measures have been dismantled. There's no subsidy for corn-based fuel ethanol any longer in the United States. Corn-based fuel ethanol is actually cheaper, significantly so, than gasoline, and is simply competing freely on the market.
So in Mozambique, you used your technology to create jobs, and I just want to emphasize for everybody that this isn't a charitable exercise. It's kind of a unique exercise that you did. Tell us a bit about that.
The idea is to, and not only the idea because it's being implemented as we speak, is to phase one, to recruit between 2,000 and 3,000 smallholder farmers and teach them a special kind of agroforestry in which they produce different crops for themselves for food, but also as one of 4 crops produce cassava. This cassava is then sold for cash to a centrally located facility that transforms the cassava into bioethanol. The bioethanol in turn is used in cooking stoves in Maputo, replacing charcoal. So here is a business where we can make money for ourselves and our partner in Mozambique, where 2,000 to 3,000 smallholder farmers increase their disposable income by a factor of 4 to 5 from a small base, granted. An opportunity that sharply reduces deforestation and an opportunity that also increases the health of the population in Maputo, because instead of using charcoal in their kitchen, they can now use clean-burning fuel ethanol. And just to emphasize that fact, every year, 2 million people in sub-Saharan Africa die from lung diseases because they sit in small kitchens using charcoal. This is more than the death toll from malaria, and this is what we are addressing with this. The beauty then, next step, is that once we have this up and running, then it's easily replicated in other parts of Mozambique and in many other parts of Africa.
And that is where we're going to leave you for this week. If you want to get in touch with the show, though, here is how you do it. You can send a tweet to me at Kamal AJE or our business editor, who you saw there, at Abid Oliver Ali. And if you're not on Twitter, email's just fine, counting the cost at downtoZero.net. While you're online, head over to downtoZero.com/business. You link onto the CTC page there. We pop all our episodes up there in full for you to catch up on whenever you would like. But that is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.